Very much, Joe. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the fourth and final session of the week on how to build a hybrid cloud environment with VMware Cloud and AWS. We hope you enjoyed the earlier sessions this week, and to end the series, we'll be discussing choosing the right disaster recovery method for your workloads. My name is Kieran Reid. I'm a partner solutions architect specializing on VMware Cloud and AWS. My moderators today are Troy and Brian, who are both within my team and will happily answer any questions you may have. So please feel free to send us through in the chat. And this is an overview of what we'll be discussing in today's session. So I'll start off with the need for disaster recovery and why this is more important now than ever. We'll also look at the challenges of existing DR solutions, and throughout today's sessions, show you what VMware and AWS have done to address these. We'll then look at the disaster recovery use cases, see how customers can leverage the presented solutions to address their individual needs, and then discuss the technology options available to you, show you how to combine them and how you can get started, or add some of these solutions to your existing disaster recovery methods that you may already have. Okay, so let's get started by looking at some of the events that bring around the need for disaster recovery. And when you mention the term disaster to your business, this is probably what most people refer to. And while this is a reality for some, and the risk that many businesses do have to contend with, depending on their geographic locations, the majority of organizations, and then for the majority of the time, the actual greater risk of a disaster comes from more mundane events. These are the things that actually cause more disruption to the business. And as you can see by some of the research we did, and were done by other third parties, operational failures and human errors are in fact higher than natural disasters themselves. And this is why having an efficient and tested DR solution is so important. The recovery from these events can be really time-consuming and costly to your business. And as you can see today, ransomware and power outages are the #1 cause for disaster recovery events across businesses and organizations, and actually more than 2 times likely than natural disasters. And here's what some of the analysts are saying. With 76% of organizations reporting an incident within the last year, 52% experiencing data breaches within a year, and only 17% of organizations testing their DR solutions more than twice a year. And in addition to this, we found that 6% of organizations don't have any DR plans whatsoever. But the question is, if having an effective DR plan is so important, why aren't organizations doing more to protect their workloads? And these are just some of the issues organizations face, with cost, complexity, disruption to the business being some of the key challenges that we've got at the moment. So let's start looking at these in a little bit more detail and unpack it a little further. And if we break these challenges down, we can clearly see why just 17% of companies test their DR solutions more than twice a year, and why some companies don't have DR solutions at all. And the first is operational complexity. As production systems change, the recovery documentation can quickly become out of date, and that poses a real change to a lot of organizations. And the next is cost, usually associated with running a secondary on-prem data center, purchasing sufficient, and in most cases, unused capacity for the unlikely event of a DR. And finally is low reliability, and that's normally caused by not testing disaster recovery plans properly, and after every operational change throughout the year. Some of my previous organizations that I worked for, every time there was a new system introduced or a change to a critical system introduced, which is on the list, they would have to have a DR done in place to test those systems out. That actually came at a huge cost to our organizations, and a lot of time was invested in that, and a lot of organizations aren't prepared to do that. So low reliability is another main cause for this. But these are just some of the main challenges organizations have. And next, what we're going to do now is look at what VMware and AWS are doing to help address some of these. So VMware and AWS are developing solutions to minimize business impact, simplify DR, and reduce the costs. Really going to address those main concerns we just touched on. And this is being done by offering partners and our customers disaster recovery as a service options. So we're looking to minimize the impact of testing, recovery through automation, simplify the DR deployment and management, as well as reduce costs. And as I go through today's presentation, I'm going to come back to this slide and discuss what VMware and AWS have done to address the challenges that we've touched on earlier using these managed disaster recovery service offerings. So these disaster recovery as a service offerings will allow customers to make decisions on which solution is best for their individual business needs. VMware and AWS both know that one solution may not fit all workloads. So we'll discuss multiple solutions that can be used in isolation or together to address the different SLAs your business could have. So before we begin, let's look at some of the terminology that we'll be discussing through in today's session. So RPO, RTO, and MTD are acronyms you're probably all aware of, and they're usually defined by the business, C-levels, or IT management who have been empowered to define these service level agreements. Now, if your customers need help in defining these SLAs, sometimes people come to us and say, we don't know what our RPO and RTOs are. So what we usually go to them and say, go back to your business and ask them, how much data or downtime can your organization sustain before it starts impacting your business? And those impacts can be both financial or even reputational. And usually by then asking that question, they can quickly work out what it's going to be. How long can I be down before it starts costing me money, or before it starts costing me my reputation, where we'll start going to other vendors? And that usually can define what your RPO and RTOs are and gives you a good starting point. So bearing in mind, companies will always, and customers will always start with the lowest option. So I'll always say to you, 0 downtime for everything and 0 data loss. But it's our role to help them understand each solution and the cost implications associated with each, because we can give them 0 downtime for everything, but that can come at quite a cost. So let's look through the different stages of a business thing, and starting with stage 1. At this stage, all systems are running and production workloads are all functioning correctly. Now, if we go to stage 2, at some point, systems need to be recovered. At this point, the RPO, the recovery point objective, determines the maximum acceptable amount of data loss, which is usually measured in time. And depending on your SLA and your DR cost requirements, this could be minutes, hours, or even longer. So at stage 3, the systems are recovered back online, but they're not yet quite ready for production. The recovery time objective, or RTO, determines the maximum tolerable downtime time of systems to bring these critical systems back online. So this could be, again, minutes or hours, or it could be longer. And usually, what it needs to do here is, recover replay logs and bring the systems back online, checking everything. So that usually happens over here. And then at stage 4, the systems are recovered, they get the integrity of systems, and the data has been verified, and all critical systems can resume normal operations. So the work recovery time between stages 3 and 4 determines the amount of time needed to actually verify those systems or data integrity. So examples of that, like I mentioned, are checking database logs, making sure the applications or services are up and running. And those tasks are usually performed by system administrators, application administrators, or system owners. And finally, the sum of RTO and of recovery time objective and the work recovery time is actually measured as the maximum tolerable downtime. And this defines the amount of time that a business process can be disrupted without causing unacceptable consequences. So it could be that financial loss or reputational loss that I mentioned earlier. And this value is usually defined by business management teams, chief technology officers, chief information officers, or IT management that have been empowered to do so. So before we look at the technology, let's discuss the disaster recovery use cases and see just how VMware Cloud and AWS, which if you're following on the earlier sessions this week, in the earlier series, can help you and your customers meet their business goals and regulatory requirements. So what are the use cases? So the first is disaster recovery, and this is the most critical use case. This is where when a site goes down unexpectedly and VMs need to be migrated as fast as possible to the secondary site. In this case, disaster recovery as a service technologies enable either a full or partial site recovery, and it does the failover as fast as possible to recover the business services. Then next, we've got disaster avoidance. And this happens when an organization knows in advance that a disaster is about to happen. And in this case, organizations can typically have at least a few hours notice before disaster strikes. And finally, planned migration. So while disaster recovery is the most critical, planned migrations are actually the most common use cases out there. An example here is, you could make the systems continue to function while you're doing data maintenance on, one of the systems. A lot of times, you might be doing a power down and stuff like that, and you don't want to disrupt business, critical business operations at month end. Well, plan migration can help with that. You can move systems over to your secondary sites and your users can continue to function. So we're going to discuss this in a little bit more detail in the later on in the presentation, but the technology that VMware developed to automate the failover between sites is Site Recovery Manager, and a lot of you are probably already familiar with this. So VMware developed Site Recovery Manager to address some of the earlier challenges, including simplifying DR deployment and managing everything through vCenter. So just some more terminology to be aware of for the rest of the presentation, and I'll do my best to go back and refer to this so that we know which one I'm talking about. But when we refer to Site Recovery Manager, we're referring to the on-prem recovery of solutions using Site Recovery Manager. When we refer to VMware Site Recovery, we refer to the disaster recovery as a service offered by VMware, which includes failing over to VMware Cloud and AWS. So both technologies have the same similar look and feel, and they operate in the exact same way, but VMware just sort of brand them a bit differently. And this is how VMware Cloud and AWS can help with these disaster recovery scenarios using VMware Site Recovery, the cloud version, if you like. And as you can see, there are 4 different use cases shown here that allow customers to use VMware Cloud and AWS in a way that would be the most beneficial to them. So if we go through each 4 of these in detail, firstly, there are our customers who already have a good DR solution on-prem, but want to replace or expand their existing DR site and want to explore VMware Cloud and AWS, starting with the lower risk use case. So these customers want to keep protecting some of their apps on the on-prem DR site, but want to complement it with another DR running on VMware Cloud and AWS. And if we look at number 2, VMware Site Recovery allows them to do this because we support fan-out topologies, and because we are storage agnostics, customers don't have to switch off their existing on-prem to on-prem storage replication if they don't wish to do so. Instead, they can introduce a bit of a phased approach. And then there are also customers shown here in number 3 who don't have a proper DR solution at all. Like I mentioned, that's 6% that's out there, and have run into logistical issues while setting up a secondary DR site. These customers really love the simplicity of being able to set up a new DR site in a cloud within just a few hours, and then being able to start replicating their workloads to them, thus meeting their requirements to have a DR for the first time and meeting those regulatory requirements that a lot of organizations are now being asked to do. And the 4th use case, and this segment's still small right now, but particularly attractive from a VMware Cloud and AWS perspective, and that is as we move to large data center evac customers who wholly to the cloud. So they've exited all their data centers and moved everything into the cloud. They sometimes still have a need to have cross-region or back to on-prem DR for their critical business workloads. So customers can commission an SDDC in a completely different region to their existing data centers and meet those regulatory requirements that they may have. Okay, so now we'll look at how customers are leveraging VMware Cloud and AWS SDDCs for disaster recovery. So those 4 methods are the different ways of doing it, but let's think of, they've got these sites, how are they actually using it? And the first one is the traditional active passive method, which supports the production site running all your applications, and everything is failed over to the second site when required. Now, this is the most common configuration we're seeing. And in this scenario, it does mean that customers are paying a lot of money for a DR site that is mostly idle. So what we find is, obviously, to make better use of that recovery site, Site Recovery Manager allows you to leverage, that site for workloads that aren't being used, for production. So people usually run test, dev, and regression workloads in those secondary sites. Then they can use Site Recovery Manager to shut those workloads down during an actual DR and bring up the production site. So they're making efficient use of those 2 data centers. The second one is active-active, and the term active-active refers to the use of at least 2 data centers where both can service an application at any time. So each functions as an active application site. This means that the application continues to be accessible even if parts of the network or servers fail unexpectedly, or if an entire site goes down unexpectedly. And like with active passive, to make better use of that recovery site, or the second site, should we say, customers do tend to run usually certain test dev workloads on the other one, and then shut them down when they need to. And then we've got bidirectional. So Site Recovery Manager can also provide bidirectional failover between the sites. So you can run production workloads at both sites and then use the other sites to fail over to each other in case one of them goes down. This is perfect for those workloads with low SLAs, but it does come with the caveat that you need to have at least 50% free and reserved in case of that failover. And finally, we've got multi-site failover. So we do have some financial customers in the industry out there with 3 data centers. And what they tend to do there is every quarter, so every 4 months, not quite every quarter of the year, they will shut down one of their data centers and run off 2. And move everything to one of the data centers and isolate and use the second 2 as a DR site. And every 4 months, switch them around, so that they can test every single one of their data centers within a 4-month period, so that they know that each data center is fully operational and tested to meet an actual DR scenario. And then they can also use VMware Site Recovery for this exact same method. Because again, we support that fan-out technology, they can rotate their data centers in the cloud in the same way. Okay. So now let's look at what orchestrates the failover of these workloads between data centers, and that's going to be Site Recovery Manager and VMware Site Recovery. And we're going to look at these in a little bit more detail. And again, you might be familiar with these, but we'll show you how you can use these together with some of the other service offerings that are available. So Site Recovery Manager is a product that was specifically designed to leverage the capabilities of Vsphere. So it's quite a mature product at the moment. And it integrates tightly with vCenter to simplify DR management by automating and testing the orchestration of centralized recovery plans. So Site Recovery Manager does 3 things for you. It simplifies the setup and ongoing management of recovery and migration plans. Customers can replicate traditional manual runbooks with centralized recovery plans, which reduces the time required to configure disaster recovery sites from weeks down to minutes. Anyone who's worked with it knows how easy it is and how easy it is to keep them up to date. It also automates the orchestration failover process to the secondary site, as well as the failback to the production site. So failover and failback automation eliminates those inherent errors that come through manual processes, and also eliminates a lot of the complexity that we've got in there that's usually associated with that. And this level of automation also ensures users to test their recovery plans non-disruptively and as frequently as required, increasing the predictability of the RTOs, or the recovery time objectives, and ultimately the level of confidence you have in your recovery plans. And again, if we go back to some of those issues of why customers don't tend to test their plans too often, this is one of the reasons. It's disruptive to the business. But now with Site Recovery Manager, they can do these failover tests, without any disruption at all. And it's the same thing with VMware Site Recovery. You can do that as well when you're failing over to VMware Cloud and AWS. And finally, the last option is benefit of this is Site Recovery Manager provides flexibility to choose from different replication solutions. So Site Recovery Manager can leverage Vsphere replication, the industry's first hypervisor-based replication, which is included in the Vsphere platform, and also supports all the array-based replication products from the major storage and replication vendors out there. Okay, and as you know, setting up manual runbooks in a traditional DR scenario can be really complex, and to say the least. And these runbooks have to document all the required manual recovery steps. And again, most of you work in organizations. We have hundreds of applications and hundreds of different failover plans, and automating that every time there's a change, making sure the DR plans are up to date. It can be quite challenging. And they're typically very long and complicated documents. And even worse, they quickly fall out of sync with the ongoing configuration changes made at the recovery site. And they provide plenty of room for error, as we all know, since the documentation is all a manual process. And what Site Recovery Manager does is recovery plans can be set up in minutes, with the automation provided. And most of the recovery steps don't have to be actively managed by admins. A lot of it's just done automatically for you. And since the recovery plans are mostly automated, they are much more reliable than manual runbooks that we've developed. They're much simpler to keep in sync with the ongoing changes to your virtual environment as well. Okay, Site Recovery Manager automates every aspect of a recovery plan, including testing, failover, secondary site failover, and failback to production site in order to accelerate the recovery and eliminate the risks involved with manual processes. It provides these, things like, non-disruptive testing, automated failover, as we discussed, plan migration, and automated failback. So these are the benefits that you get from using Site Recovery Manager. Each one of these little steps over here, provides different benefits for it. So if we pick up, the planned migration, the benefit of using that, is that you can shut down all your applications using Site Recovery Manager or VMware Site Recovery, and it'll make sure all your applications are in a consistent state, powered up over at your secondary site, and you can continue to work. And then you can do your migrations on your primary site, and then fail back again. The automated failback also, it enables bidirection migration, so VMs can automatically be migrated back to the original site with minimal intervention. And this is particularly useful to streamline back and forth migration between sites. A lot of auditors were saying, they want to ensure that you've tested your DR and actually run from your DR sites more frequently and regularly. And this provides a mechanism for you to do that. Okay. So I mentioned this earlier, but the disaster recovery as a service offering of Site Recovery Manager is called VMware Site Recovery. And what we've done with VMware is we've taken the DR orchestration and automation powers of Site Recovery Manager, which includes capabilities like pre-configured runbooks, and combined them with the elasticity and the operational simplicity of the cloud that is easy for Vsphere customers to adopt. So using Site Recovery Manager with VMware Cloud and AWS, we enable customers to simplify their DR by pairing VMware Site Recovery with sites running earlier versions of Vsphere. So even though you might be running the latest SDDC version in VMware Cloud and AWS, you don't need to be running that same version back on-prem. You can go back, and run versions to, like 6.7, 6.5, and even 6.0 update 3, as you can see here, giving you that backward compatibility between the two. And the core value proposition of VMware Site Recovery with VMware Cloud and AWS is it simplifies your DR operations because, it includes the power of the full-featured Site Recovery Manager that you're used to from on-prem, and B, it offers the operational consistency between the primary and disaster recovery sites so that customers don't have to change their operating model, and in addition to the challenges that are already upon you in a DR and an outage. So you've got that consistency. The second thing is it reduces cost. Some customers say, the barrier to entry for cloud disaster recovery services are still quite high. But if you think about it, the reduction of cost of not having to run another data center and maintain that, by just running your disaster recovery in the cloud. And you can reduce those costs further by running like a pilot light environment with the most critical machines over there. And then in the actual DR, you can scale out depending on your RPO and RTOs. And thirdly, Site Recovery Manager increases, the reliability and reduces the risks for customers. And again, we're addressing those pain points that we touched on earlier. And this goes back to the fact that Site Recovery allows customers to pre-configure their DR runbooks as Site Recovery Manager plans, and then test these runbooks in a non-disruptive manner. So customers can iron out any kinks in their DR planning and get a very good idea of their RTOs and generate documented proof and readiness to auditors and regulators. So the whole Site Recovery offers simple, cost-effective, reliable DR protection for entire data centers as well as individual applications. So just to quickly show you, enabling Site Recovery Manager on VMware Cloud and AWS is done through the add-ons tab. It's really simple. You just click add-on, you click, activate, and the service gets downloaded to your VMware Cloud and AWS SDDC. And then you provided a link to go and download the on-prem components. So you can go ahead and do that. And then you're able to use Site Recovery Manager, VMware Site Recovery with your on-prem data center. Whereas you've just seen, after activating the service, you can then download and configure the components, and you can start protecting your workloads. Additionally, for those customers who have moved straight into the cloud and want to use another SDDC for their DR, you're able to do that as well. You can pair your SDDC with another one, and you don't need to do any on-prem configuration and downloading of components because you just activate them both in the same way. and you can start protecting your workloads and place them into protection groups and recovery plans. And that's what we're going to discuss next. So let's start with protection groups. What are these, and what are they used for? So in many cases, a protection group will consist of virtual machines that support a service or an application, such as a mail server or an accounting system. So for example, you might have an application that consists of 2 database servers, 3 application servers, and say 4 web servers. And in most cases, it won't be beneficial to fail over all or part of this application, like say 2 or 3 servers in this particular example. All 9 of these servers need to go across and should be included in the same protection group. So when you do this, it gives you the benefit of what we call selective testing. So what does that mean, right? Having a protection group for each application enables non-disruptive, low-risk testing of individual applications, allowing application owners to non-disruptively test their DR plans as needed. So you can just make changes to your own individual applications, and they can fail those over without impacting the rest of the business, And normally in an actual DR test, where you're doing a whole site thing, you got to cut the lines, and it impacts the whole organization. But now with these protection groups and your own dedicated recovery plans, which I'll discuss next, you can actually do that on a per application basis. So that's something that's quite useful to do. So we've discussed protection groups. Now let's look at recovery plans, and and organizing these into recovery plans. And these are the run books of recovering your workloads to fail over to the recovery site. And they're used also to fail back to the primary site. So what they are is they are an automated plan for recovering protected virtual machines that you placed in into your protection groups in the previous slide onto the recovery site. So recovery plans can include 1 or more protection groups. So you could have a protection group and then a recovery plan and have a one-to-one mapping there where it can fail over just the application. Or you can have a recovery plan with multiple protection groups, so for the whole site. So when you're doing an actual DR or a full DR test, you can recover everything over, but it still gives the flexibility for application owners to fail just their application owner. So recovery plans usually include a list of virtual machines from protection groups, startup order, priority of those virtual machines, so you can configure that the database server needs to come up first, then the app server, then the web server, in a 3-tier app. You can configure the recovery plans to include custom actions during recovery, so you can re-IP your virtual machines, should you need to in your DR site. And I will explain why that's useful in a minute when we look at the demo. And as well as custom scripts can be injected at any time in the recovery plan. So, some systems are a bit more complex than just booting them up. There's a startup procedure that needs to happen, and Site Recovery Manager and protection groups allow you to do that. Okay, so just to summarize, protection groups, it's a group of virtual machines that can be failed over together to the recovery site during a DR or DR testing operation. Just remember, a virtual machine can only be part of a single protection group, whereas a recovery plan can be whereas a protection group can be part of multiple recovery plans. And recovery plans describe the actions or the steps necessary to recover a set of workloads or protection groups to that recovery site. And just before we look at the demo, we'll have a look at priorities and dependencies. So using recovery plans, it enables you to build complex recovery matrices and interdependencies. So here's an example of a start sequence. So initially we have like a master database server which will need to be recovered and functioning first. Then we'll have a secondary database server and potentially another core system like Exchange or something like that that'll be recovered in parallel. Next, we can recover the application server first, like the database server. It'll need a dependency for the second application server to be recovered, as you saw in the first one there. And this can be done separately or in the same priority group within that same recovery plan, beg your pardon. And then we're able to recover things like the front-end servers, so the Apache servers or the MailSync servers in parallel. And then finally, you can recover your desktops that might be required to access these applications. So before we go into a little bit further, I want to talk about Vsphere replication, because that's the underlying technology used to replicate virtual machines between sites. So remember, SRM, or VMware Site Recovery, is the orchestration technology, but vSphere replication is the hypervisor-based asynchronous replication solution for vSphere, enabling disaster recovery and data protection for virtual machines in your environment. So it does all the heavy lifting for you, if you like. So vSphere replication is a host-based asynchronous replication technology. It can be configured on a per VM basis, enabling precise control over which virtual machines are replicated. So it's not a replicate everything type thing. You can basically state which ones you want replicated and the RPO for each particular one. So when a virtual machine is configured for replication, what happens is it does an initial full sync and then creates a replica of the machine on the target location. And then after that, it just synchronizes the delta changes across to there. So the good thing about vSphere replication, it's compatible with nearly any type of storage supported by vSphere. So in other words, it's possible to replicate from SAN to SAN, or local disk to NAS, or NAS to vSAN, and those are just a few examples. But the flexibility enables vSphere replication to work on nearly any vSphere environment, regardless of the underlying storage type. So vSphere replication can be used to replicate starting from just a few virtual machines, one or up to hundreds of virtual machines through the deployment of additional vSphere replication appliances. But do bear in mind that the replication of virtual machines is done with vSphere on its, the recovery of virtual machines done through vSphere replication is done on its own. And that's okay for like small organizations or a small set of VMs that you want to recover. But if you want to start recovering hundreds of VMs, it's not ideal and can take quite a lot of time. But fortunately, this is where Site Recovery Manager can be used to orchestrate, the more complex recovery of workloads to a large number of virtual machines. So SRM can actually, will actually orchestrate the recovery of those VMs, and vSphere replication will do the replication bits for you. And this is the last slide I've got here. Site Recovery Manager requires a vCenter instance to be on the source and target location. And after deployment, instances are usually paired, and then information are usually shared between the two. And I'll show you that in the demo in just a second. So this allows administrators to create resource pools and mappings on both sites to further automate the recovery. So you can say VMs on these networks need to go to VMs on, need to go to networks on the recovery side, these folders onto that folder, this data store onto that data store, and you can do that mapping between the two and orchestrate exactly where your VMs need to fail over to. Okay, so now we'll take a well-deserved break from all the slides and all the talking, and I'll show you the site recovery a demo, which I recorded earlier, which will show us failing over from an on-prem SDDC and here in our AWS labs to an actual VMware Cloud and AWS SDDC that's actually running in the cloud. So what I'll do is I will kick this off and I'll let you know what's happening. So this is our demo environment. The green vCenter box, the green one above, vCenter above, is our on-prem SDDC, as you know from your on-prem environment. And on the blue one is our VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC. And for this demo, we're going to use the Lab SRM Demo 1 server, and it's functioning as a website, and you can see the site's active. We've got a little simulation running over there, and it's being used as a web server. But before we get started, let's take a look at the site pairing, because I said I wanted to show you that in the lab between the two sites. So if we look at the network mappings, you can see how you can map your source and destination networks together. You can do the same for your folder mapping, so you can move your Exchange servers to your Exchange servers. Same as your resource pool mappings, you can decide where you want those to fail over. And storage policies, if you're using vSAN on both sides, and placeholder data stores, depending on where you want the vSphere replication machines to go over there. So when you're ready, you can select the recovery plans and select the recovery plan you want to kick off with the virtual machine you want to fail over. So in our case, Lab SRM Recovery Plan 1. Once you've confirmed the right one is selected and it's got the virtual machine in there that you want to fail over, you can select the recovery plan, hit I understand, and select disaster recovery and go. And you can see there you can do the plan migration there as well. Once you've confirmed you're happy with that, you can hit finish. So site recovery, you can select the site recovery steps to see the progress of the failover. So VMware Site Recovery makes all the steps during the recovery operation available for you, so you can see exactly where you are in the recovery plan. and which is quite useful, right? Because you might be foiling over hundreds of machines together, and as you can see there, you can put them into different priority groups. I just had the one, so I just left it outside of that by itself. It'll be the first and last one to come up. And again, if you look at the production site, you can see now that VM has now gone offline. If we go to the web page, and if we go to the DR site actually first, you see that VM has now recovered on that site. Hasn't got an IP address yet because it's still being failed over from our lab to the SDDC, but you can see the site's no longer available. It's unable to talk to it, the little X there. It's going to time out in a little while. So while that's being failed over, I just want to talk to you about the network changes. So you can set up your on-prem environment and site recovery to have the same networks, but you can only advertise that network from one site. So in the event of a DR, you'll need to move the gateway across to the cloud. So for the purposes of this demo, I configured it to have its own IP address on the other side, and then you'll see it's a 192.168 address that's going to come up over there. But I just want to call out that you can actually maintain that IP address available to you. So there we go. The site's finally timed out, so that's good. So the VMs should be recovering soon. It takes a little bit of time. It's got to synchronize everything, wait for VMware tools to be available, and when it's happy, it finally powers everything back on again. So while that's coming up online, you'll notice that the rest of the recovery plan will continue to execute in the background. That machine has now got an IP address that's just recovered. So if we hit refresh there, that site should be available. So that's just a quick demo of how easy it is to configure that. Now, the good thing about this is your auditors are going to, or your management might want proof that you've actually been doing your failovers as frequently as you've been saying. So what it does is it actually generates a report for you. So if you go down there and click on recovery plan history, you'll see there's a detailed report with all the steps that it just went through, which you can then export and show to your different auditors. So that concludes that particular demo. I hope you could see just how easy it is to set up and do all that next. So using SRM and Vsphere replication, we've addressed the challenges. What challenges have we addressed this far? And I mentioned we're going to come back to this slide and see. So minimizing the impact by efficiency and automation using the on-prem site recovery manager, or using the Vsphere site recovery for VMware Cloud and AWS. So we've simplified DR deployment by managing everything in vCenter, which leverages the existing skill set and skills from your IT support staff. And we've taken a step to reducing costs. Customers no longer have to run a secondary data center, and they could run a small pilot light in VMware Cloud and AWS, and again, scale out when they need to. But we'll address how we can further reduce those costs as we go through the remaining of the presentation. But we also mentioned earlier that there's no one size that fits all for all different workloads when it comes to machines with different SLAs. Some will have higher ones and some will have some slightly shorter ones. So this is where customers can leverage the capabilities of stretch clusters within VMware Cloud and AWS. So let's take a look at stretch clusters, discuss what they are and what they enable customers to do. Okay, so what are stretch clusters and what value do they provide to you and your business? And stretch clusters protect against the loss of a single availability zone by stretching the vSphere cluster across two availability zones within a single region. So it's effectively abstracting all but the most catastrophic failures away. You could lose an entire AZ and your vSphere cluster could still continue functioning in a second AZ, for your most business critical applications. So when deciding which solution to pick and to protect your business critical workloads, it really depends on the SLAs which have been defined by your business. So deciding which is more appropriate depends on your SLA and budget, of course. And again, when beginning of the presentation, we mentioned that customers will always say, zero data loss and RPO of zero and RTO of zero. Everything needs to come up, really quickly. But while we can offer that, that does come at a particular cost. With stretch clusters, you get 4 nines of availability, but it's a bit more of an expensive solution. And you do find that when these costs are presented to a lot of the businesses, they do look at the more cost-effective approach, which can be delivered with a single cluster and then replicating something with using Site Recovery Manager. So that needs to be balanced out, between the business and the risk of those workloads not being available. So it's a conversation that you need to have with your customers. It's also worth mentioning here that the decision to deploy a stretch cluster or a standard multi-host cluster must be done on deployment. So you can't deploy a single cluster in VMware Cloud and AWS and then stretch it later. It needs to be stretched when you commission it. What you can do, though, is create a single cluster that's not stretched, and then if you decide you do need that functionality, build a stretch cluster in another cluster within the SDDC, and then do a migration over to that one, and then destroy the original one. So that's an option there for you. So stretch clusters allow customers to easily add resiliency between availability zones, as we touched on earlier, without having to configure a disaster recovery as a service option. And because it's built into the infrastructure layer directly, stretch clusters resolve AZ availability problem by deploying a stretch cluster across availability zones. So you get the same HA capabilities that you have on a normal one across 2 availability zones. So this powerful capability is delivered as a managed service. So you don't have to configure anything here. VMware and AWS take care of all of this for you in the background. And it removes the complexity traditionally associated with architecting or maintaining a metro availability cluster solution. So let's look at the different failure scenarios that this can help mitigate against. So the first is a host failure, and this is this is a normal one, and it follows the same methodology and approach of a normal non-stretch cluster, where in the case of a failure inside an AZ, our standard host remediation system will just lifecycle that host and put a new host into that cluster. No virtual machines will need to be moved, with the exception where only the remaining copy of the data resides in the other site. In that case, you'll have to do, it'll get restarted up on the other site there. Now, if you have a witness failure, all the VMs will remain running in place. The automated support system will then deploy a witness appliance into the cluster, a new one. And once the healthy witness appliance is available, vSAN will then rebuild all those missing cross-site witness components. So now customers do ask, well, what happens if I lose the witness and then lose one of the, the 2 clusters, the stretch cluster running the 2 availability zones? What if I lose an AZ, half the cluster? Well, in order to protect the environment from a split lane scenario, VMware will gracefully shut those VMs down until at least one of the 2 are up and running to form that quorum. And then you get the witness vote. So that's what they do to mitigate against that. It's an incredibly unlikely scenario, but that's how it's managed in case it does happen. And then this is in the unlikely event of an AZ failure, Vsphere HA will then restart the effective virtual machines onto the surviving availability zone. So this comes from that catastrophic failure. You lose an entire availability zone, and you've got these business critical applications that need to be up and running all the time. You can leverage a stretch cluster for this. And then what happens is, once the AZ has been restored, vSAN will then sync all those components. And once the components have been restored and the data is synchronized, if needed, DRS will then move those workloads back to the original availability zone. So that's basically how it works from there. Now, this is all done and managed for you. Customers running a stretch cluster on the VMware Cloud and AWS benefit from this fully managed service, So in the event of an AZ failure, VMware and AWS will work together to recover the fail availability zone, while the customer's business critical workloads will just continue to run in the second AZ. There'll be no, when the AZ is restored, the data resynchronized and data locality restored, all those VMs will move back again. Now, if you want to see what that looks like from within the vCenter server itself, I've got a little recorded server animation for you over here, which you can have a look at. So again, we've got an AZ failure, as you can see over here, and a bunch of the VMs running on these particular hosts will change when there we go. Once the AZ is restored, you'll see that host will update from that worker. Once they've rebuilt all those components, DRS will just rebalance all the workloads. Once all the data is synced, the VMs get returned back to the original availability zone. So that's what it looks like inside the actual vCenter server itself. It's all done for you automatically. VMware and AWS will work together outside of this and help fix this and ensure that this is resolved for the customers, and their business critical apps will continue to run. Okay, so combining these 2 solutions, and again, there's no one solution that meets all your business requirements, so you can use VMware Site Recovery and stretch clusters together to to provide the best solution for your most business critical applications and one with sort of higher SLAs. So you can use active data centers with stretch clusters, and that's ideal for where you have an RPO of 0 and those business critical workloads. Then there are additional data center needs, such as failover to a remote site. If there are additional needs, such as failover to a remote site, beg your pardon, vSAN can take advantages of those capabilities by providing Vsphere replication and SRM to protect the site in addition to or instead of using a stretch cluster. And all of these tools are software defined and don't rely on anything hardware specific, or don't rely on any hardware specific functionality. And that's a real key ingredient to creating an agile data center. Okay, so finally, now we're going to look at VMware Cloud disaster recovery and how it's different from the solutions we've discussed so far. So let's come back to that slide again that we said we're going to come back on. Now, how have VMware and AWS so far met those challenges that we spoke on, that we highlighted in the beginning? So using the automated orchestration provided by VMware Site Recovery, we've provided the efficiency that was previously missing. Because everything is driven by vCenter, we've simplified the DR solutions by not having to reskill our organization support staff, because everything's still in there. And cost has somewhat been reduced by no longer having to manage a physical secondary data center or primary data center, should you wish. Customers can run a minimal deployment known as pilot light again and scale up their SDDCs in the event of a disaster. But looking at that last one again, some customers do come up and say to us, even the cost of running a pilot light in a VMware Cloud and AWS environment is quite expensive and does provide a higher barrier to entry. And in addition, we do have some customers, I mentioned that 6% earlier, that have actually just never had a DR before, and they just don't know where to start. And this is where VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, which offers an on-demand disaster recovery solution delivered as an easy-to-use software as a service solution with cloud economics, can help. This on-demand service runs on AWS. Everything is running on the AWS infrastructure, which is both easy to use as well as being cost-effective. So if we look at this in a little bit more detail, it provides an on-demand, easy-to-use DR solution with cloud economics. And what we'll do is we'll unpack each and every one of these boxes at the bottom there in just a bit. So starting with the first one, you can have a minimally deployed environment running SDDCs in waiting for faster recovery times. But if you don't want to run that pilot light option, you don't really have to. If you've got an SLA that allows you to have your machines replicated into the cloud and then spin up an SDDC and only pay for it when you have a DR or a DR test, that's certainly an option. And then in the event of an incident, the cloud recovery points can be restarted directly on VMware Cloud and AWS. So there's no need to hydrate or recover from backups before powering on your virtual servers. And that's something that you don't get sometimes in these pilot light environments. You would still need to recover that VM, scale out your clusters so you've got the storage, restore those VMs from backups, and then power on those VMs. But with this solution, with VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, you don't need to do that with this using the scale out file system that this solution offers. There's no VM formatting conversion required or anything like that. So everything's kept in native vSphere format. So no need for brittle, time-consuming conversions. And ransomware recovery is the other one that we mentioned. You can rapidly identify the recovery point to restore to using that live mount functionality in that scale-out file system. So if we look at the fact that it's easy to use because it's consistent, consistent familiar operations, manage both production and DR sites within vCenter, and you can retain access to that familiar vSphere console. It simplifies DR maintenance operations, so there's got no burden of the software lifecycle management. It's all done for you as a managed service. It provides automatic checks every 30 minutes, increasing your confidence in your DR plans. And it has audit-ready built-in reports to meet the compliance objectives. So just like we saw in that site recovery demo, when after you ran it, you can generate that report and show that to your business and to your auditors. You can do the same with this as well. These reports are built in to do that too. And then the cloud economics part, it's immutable and encryptable forever incremental recovery points stored on effective and cost-effective storage within the Amazon cloud. I beg your pardon there we go. Simplified pricing, making it simpler for customers to provide pricing to their business based on the amount of capacity they're going to consume and the amount of VMs they're going to protect. You only pay when capacity is needed, so it leverages the elasticity of the cloud computing environment. So you only spin up infrastructure when you need it for tests and for failovers, and then you're paying minimal, charges when you're not using it. And it also provides optimized failbacks as well. So all the egress charges are minimized, and customers only pay for the data being transferred on the failback, because once you've done your failover, it's only the deltas that you pay for when the data exits the VMware Cloud disaster recovery system. So customers can protect up to 2,500 VMs now per region, per org per region, allowing increased protection and scale, which is useful for large organizations. If you need more than that, you can just commission up a new org and a new file system and a new scale-out file system, and you can protect more than 2,500 should you require. And the service is highly capable when it comes to helping recover from ransomware attacks. We mentioned that those were, one of the number one causes of attacks these days and outages. So VMware and AWS allow you to retain a deep history of immutable, incorruptible snapshots, ranging from most recently taken one from a few minutes old to years old. And we allow you to instantly power on your VMs from any one of those snapshots without having to rehydrate that data. So that's quite a powerful, tool to have at your disposal, especially when you've been hit by these malware and ransomware attacks. You can just recover from a VM where you knew it was in a good state really, really quickly. And you can do that at the scale of 100 VMs at a time as well. And the combination of the capabilities is uniquely well suited for, like we mentioned, this ransomware recovery. Because if you remember, as we recall earlier, these ransomware attacks and power outages make up over 60% of DR events today. Okay, so to wrap up, we're getting on now and I've talked enough. So here's how AWS and VMware have addressed the challenges. We touched on the first two already, with minimizing the impact, being able to use site recovery and simplifying everything, being able to manage it through DR. And now with VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, you've got the cloud economics. You can reduce those costs. It's not an expensive solution anymore to have a running DR site. So depending on your SLAs, you have a conversation with your business and you can pick the right solution for you, whether it's something like VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, or something like a stretch cluster to take care of the most critical business workloads. And then you can use Site Recovery Manager in between, as well. So you've got options there to meet the majority of applications out there. And if we look at the portfolio, this is how VMware positioned these three solutions. You've got good old Site Recovery Manager at the bottom for the on-prem to on-prem environment. When you want to do a failover to a cloud, customers can start using VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery. We recommend you start with that. And then for the applications with lower SLAs, a VMware Site Recovery and stretch clusters can address a lot of those business needs. So just to repeat that, start with using, lead with VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, and then should they have, lower SLAs, VMware Site Recovery, and then stretch clusters if they need to do that. So your business empowered IT managers will be responsible for picking, the right solution depending on the SLAs. And the ideal solution for implementing disaster recovery to VMware Cloud and AWS usually involves a combination of approaches. In this scenario, a smaller, always-on SDDC can be provisioned upfront through VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery and can be utilized with VMware Site Recovery to handle the more business-critical workloads that will benefit from lower RPOs and lower RTOs options. So what are the next steps? How do you get started with this? So the first thing you need to do is have a conversation with your business or empowered IT management about the SLAs. And I told you what to do if they're unaware of those SLAs. Ask them how long their systems can be down before it starts posing a problem to you, and get those SLAs for both their business critical and non-critical workloads that need to be failed over. Then start working with your AWS and VMware representatives for more information on VMware Site Recovery and VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, and see which solution which might be best for you. And then, really consider trying these out for yourself. They always say, learn by doing, and, spin up a pilot, consider a pilot, and again, approach your AWS VMware representatives and say, we want to run a pilot. And in most cases, they'll help you with that. They can show you how it works, how to protect your workloads, and, show you the benefits that you can get from that. And if you'd like some more information on either of those two programs, disaster recovery solutions that we mentioned, beg your pardon, VMware Site Recovery or VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, you can use those QR codes or just go to the links or just type them into your favorite browser, and it'll direct you to the VMware sites or the Amazon sites, and all the informations are there for you, and you can have a look at that. And do check back on those sites quite a lot, because the information, we are growing and developing the solution quite regularly. So with that, thank you so much for your time today. I hope all the questions that you may have been asked were answered in the chat by Troy and Brian. I want to thank Joe as well for putting the session together. And if you have any more further questions, please do reach out to us.